There are three sources on this page. I want to introduce them. One is a page and a half from a very good little book about discernment of spirits. Actually, it is the book I recommend most often if somebody wants to kind of grapple with the question in an extraordinarily practical way. It is by Donna Stephan, who is a member of our parish and a sister of charity in Cincinnati, called Discerning Disciples, and she wrote it for the use of RCIA teams, and hence the title Discerning Disciples. It's a kind of ambiguous title. It has to do with kind of figuring out who is a disciple of Jesus, and then also creating disciples who have the gift or the interest or instinct to discern what is moving them so that they can better follow what's of life. That's her book. This is a little section from chapter 2 of it. I'll get to that in a minute. The piece by Rumi at the bottom was a birthday card to me. This past week it has been my birthday and I have moved on. But this one was in one of those little websites. It was beautifully calligraphied. And this phrase, I don't think it's exactly a full poem, but it's a lovely phrase, isn't it, by the Sufi poet Rumi. Let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love. It will not lead you astray. This, too, is a way of describing what we're about here in considering the discernment of spirits. That is, we're about what we understand to be the pull of life, to be those places where we're really drawn by what is genuine and what makes sense and what's going to lead us to life. And we call it that which is a response to our love. That it is valuable, it's reliable. When you're in touch with what you love, you're in touch with what's going to guide you well. It's also called a strange pull in this brief little poem, because it's not easy to get acquainted all the time with what we really love, with what's really moving us. So it's worth investigating the strangeness, and that's a good deal of what goes on in the life of one who is going to become more discerning about their future, about their choices, about their present relationship with the Lord. That you're learning to pay attention to all that moves within, all that is hidden, that comes to light only gradually at times. And Donna has an interesting example of that in her second paragraph here. She defines, first of all, discernment in her first paragraph of this chapter, which is really very well done. We are sifting through and separating out various feelings, beliefs, values, and inner voices in order to listen for and to the voice of the Spirit of God. So it's a paying attention and then a discriminating what to trust, what to choose, what to follow. It's nicely defined there. It also has a reference to 1 Corinthians. St. Paul has a good deal of language in his letters, expecting that the people he's talking to know what it is to listen to the Holy Spirit and to trust the Holy Spirit as a guide to life. Then she has this marvelous little example. We have to honestly reflect, she says about 6 lines down, on all the parts of ourselves inside, such as thoughts, feelings, beliefs, hopes, and sift through them until the truth becomes clear. And I love this note. For example, if I find myself always arriving late at meetings, something is going on inside that causes the behavior. Maybe I'm late because I'm trying to do too much and I'm just packing in one more thing before I leave my house. Perhaps I'm bored at the meetings and think they are unimportant and not run well. Surely that has been in the lives of some of you. Or I'm really afraid maybe of getting more involved in making a deeper commitment. Commitment being a choice word, she then goes into that. She says, well, what is this about? What is it about commitment that frightens me? Do I feel insecure? If I do, how might I bring that to God? My insecurity about commitment. Or do I just not want to get any closer to it, so I won't bring it to God? I'll just dwell with it myself and bury it a few more months or years. My fear of that. What else do I know about this feeling of insecurity that operates in my life? Might God be wanting to heal this broken part of me? What is the wholeness and inner freedom that God wants for me? This is an extraordinary aspect of the Ignatian point of view, that God wants something for you. It's not only you seeking God, but God seeks to be available to you and to draw out the circumstances of your life for good. So then she sums up. You notice it starts with what is happening, then there's a listening to find out what is underneath that behavior, and then the ability to see the truth, which would be the next step. Naming what is going on, some of the fear, and then seeing if we're drawn to step forward. I have an example of that is somewhat akin to Donna's. You know that I have been involved lately with the retreat center at Milford. I used to work there back in the 80s and early 90s, and then have now taken up what is called a sort of half-time responsibility to be available and part of the staff there, largely to run the programs that I used to run and that I find easy and enjoyable to run, called personally directed retreats, where you meet with people like this on the first evening, and then they continue to meet with their individual director, and that's all I have to do. Show up for mass, handle complaints if there are any. But I'm not doing a lot in front of people, which, though I do it regularly here in the chapel, it's not my favorite suit. I don't like to be talking to people when I'm not sure what's going on the other side of their head. After a while, at a given parish, you get to know people and you can speak more easily, but beyond 10 minutes, no. So the request comes up to me, therefore, at Milford, well, Father, we have this men's group that's going to be needing a retreat director on this weekend, let's say when was it? I think it was late September. And I said, well, I'm just not really good at that. I don't enjoy doing conference retreats where you're standing up there 5 times, trying to guide and, hope that people's life of prayer is somewhat clear to you, etc. And I said, well, I've done some of this, but I've been very successful doing it mainly with women religious, and I meet them only twice a day. And I know a little bit of their lives and what's going on, so I trusted myself for women religious. And then I inched forward and said, well, I took a women's group out at Milford about 3 years ago, and that seemed to go all right. But I really had this block about doing a group retreat in front of 40 or 45 men who I feel are uniformly golf players and fathers of families, places where I don't have a lot of simpatico. And the question kept coming, and it came to the point where I, like the little example here, I had to ask, what is underneath that? And I looked at it as part of my history. This now is where you go into things that you hadn't really noticed were operating. Part of my history of relating to the male gender. Never easy for me in school. I wasn't a golf player or a basketball player or a ball player of any kind, and so you get categorized. you get pushed aside, and you learn how to handle that, and you handle it by avoiding the occasion of getting maybe, bullied or disgraced. So you kind of say, well, okay, there's all of that. Now that's not operating out at Milford. I'm sure I could be safe with the average group of adult laymen. And then I went into that and I said, that's therefore determining whether I say yes or no to a possible spiritual ministry which seems to need attention. And at that point, I was becoming vulnerable to saying yes. Eventually, I did say yes to this retreat. I thought, well, this one retreat I'll do. Let's see how it works. Thank God there were only 28 people in that retreat. And, I standing in front of them, I had my material ready. I decided to go this way. I would talk to them about 5 episodes in the New Testament where Jesus had a relationship to men. The first one was the call of the brothers, James and John, and the second one, I'm pretty sure, was dealing with the paralytic who was lowered through the roof by his friends. I've always conceived of that as a male paralytic being handled by his buddies in town, who knew that he needed attention but did not want it, or at least was not able to get it by himself. I thought that was a good theme for men in the church, and that seemed to work out. Then finally I went, well, not finally, but the next one was Zacchaeus, and so on. And I did these talks, and I tried to size up what was going on the other side of their heads. It was a younger group than I expected. That first kind of disconcerted me. But I thought, well, these guys are, I think, fathers, but they must have young sons. I got to know a few of them from one-on-one conversations. But there was one especially who was a big, sort of beefy man, and I thought, he's got to be a high school football coach. And I saw him with his notepad, something like this. As I was speaking. You try not to let things like that bother you, but things go on. Finally, I even met that man one-on-one. These shirts I wear in the summertime? He came up to me as we were having coffee and actually did this. He said, "Where did you get this shirt?" I had no idea that there was a commonality in the terms of, shirt fashion. The other thing I didn't know is that he spoke to me then, yes, about what I was speaking, but he liked it because it reminded him of his English education. He was not a football coach, but an English teacher at a high school in northern Kentucky. That further broke open the kind of thing I had been dealing with, which was a lot of imagination about who these men are, instead of realizing that they are a lot like me in many ways. They have imagination, they have history, they have fears, they have an interest even in what they wear. So I have said yes again to one of those retreats. It's going to be happening in 2 weekends from now, right before Palm Sunday. Now, I look back at this page. Let yourself be silently drawn to the strange pull of what you really love. And I think I have been drawn to something that was, first of all, strange to me, but it was a pull toward what I really love, which is engaging other people in the work of their own spiritual discernment and their relationship with God. I love doing that. And I have gotten to the point where it is not so difficult to say yes to do that in a situation that hitherto had been repellent. if not fearful, and now is less strange and more akin to where I really am. I think that's a good example of something that occurred in my life, I think almost precisely because I have a Jesuit identity and Jesuit background and was involved in Jesuit ministry and needed to say something back to the organization, which was asking me several times to do something which at first seemed strange and fearful. You see the parallel there. On the other side of this page, just so you know what's there, comes from a little book that is handed out to faculty members here at Xavier University, if they want. It's part of the Department of Mission and Ministry, and it is a way of taking some of the Ignatian themes and trying to help them, trying to help the reader or the interested person understand the practicalities of certain habits of mind and thought that assist the activity of being a discerning person. These questions may or may not be of interest to you, but I find it intriguing that at the campus there is a way of tricking people, you might almost say, or helping them stumble into their inner life. Asking them, you know, what do you notice of God's presence in the events of your day? Where do you feel passionate? Do you notice your reactions to people, your ideas, to their events and to ideas? Do you listen, really listen to others? These kinds of questions might be for you, 1 or 3 or 5 of them, a way to enter into that form of rumination, which is paying attention to all that moves within. For the sake of understanding better what to trust and how to choose and to follow. This is getting to where you expected to be today. I have one more story, but I know that last week there was a more general invitation or a general sort of like layout of the discernment of spirits as an aspect of Ignatian spirituality, and I was asked to just do a few practical examples of that for the sake of maybe helping people think of it in their own lives. Next week, not to rush on, but next week I would like to devote the time, as much as you would wish, to hearing some of the stories that are in the room and interacting with those, just so you know. But the other story that's been on my mind is of far greater import in my life. Well, maybe not. I don't know. This business of actually working with some conference retreats for men has been a big deal in some ways. But a much bigger deal at the time was an invitation I received to really shift my calling. Well, some spiritual writers speak of you have first a job, then you have a career, then you have a calling. I was in my first job back in the 70s in San Francisco as a faculty member at the University of San Francisco. It was a job, and I thought it might become a career, but it sure wasn't my calling. I didn't know that. I just, you know, at the age of like, what was I? I was 38 to 40 in those days. You don't have a lot of depth about what God really wants of you, or the fact that in some ways or other, you know, you could be a lot happier if you were doing what is most consistent with your gifts. Now, nobody said that to me, least of all God. It didn't come through that way. But something came through to me in my last summer, what turned out to be my last summer of teaching at the University of San Francisco. It was the summer of 1980, and I was all prepared for the fall program. And I had been able to acquire one of what was called the humanities seminars with, they weren't graduate students, but they were seniors, they were very bright kids. And I was going to do this in 17th century culture, poetry, prose, and science. not so much that I would teach science, but that I brought in some of the writers, such as Descartes, such as the intro of Isaac Newton to his writings. You know, these were very interesting human documents. Francis Bacon really sort of was very fascinating to me, along with the poets and along with the playwrights. It was all ready, as were my other courses, a kind of undergraduate course in English Renaissance poetry, which was, you know, not a seminar or anything, and then there was writing and the intros that you do. It was all set up. This was July of 1980. Of course, it had been set up for several months, and I got a phone call from Milford again, from a dear friend there who said that the director of the Jesuit Renewal Center had been asked to take a different job in Chicago, and they were looking now to interview people as the director of the program there. I knew something of the Jesuit Renewal Center. I'd been in on early conversations about its ethos, the way of community life, the goal of making personally directed retreats available to people far and wide through the Archdiocese, and of training people to do that work. It was a fascinating work, and it was very alive. I would visit there when I would visit Cincinnati. It had been going for about 8 years, and now they needed a director, and he was literally asking me if I would be willing to fly from San Francisco to Cincinnati to the interview. And I said, oh, I am so sorry. I just got everything set up for the fall. I mean, they wanted somebody in September. I said, I can't even consider it. But, you know, thanks for asking. It was a rather brief phone call. And then I hung up and began to be aware of things that were moving inside of me. A lot of poor me. Oh my God. For me, of that moment, you know, the regrets, things always happen to me too late for me to say yes, but actually that would be a pretty interesting job. It began to crystallize for me that it would be, as a matter of fact, the job that would remove from me the pain of working in an educational institution that had standards that I couldn't respond to very much, you know, scholarly writing and research. But an awful lot of opportunity to continue to teach and to work with people in their spiritual places. It just looked very good. And it was a lot of poor me. And I saw through that one pretty quick. Half an hour later, I called this man back. And I said, I know I couldn't do it in September. We could figure out some way, though, for me to be there in January if you still want to interview me. And he said, well, we'll fly you in if you're serious about wanting the job. That was one of several moments during this whole process where I had to say to myself, don't lie. Tell him you are serious, instead of going into that other mode where you say, well, I don't know, I couldn't afford that. So I said, yes, I'm serious. You know, I'm very serious in talking about this. So you fly from July in San Francisco to July in Milford, Ohio. I had remembered it, but And the other thing that was going on was that they were ending their seminar program for the summer. It was probably late September. It was around the Feast of St. Ignatius, so late July. And they were having a show. You know, the people who took part were doing things like Spanish dancing. There was a señorita from Spain who had been part of the training program. There were comedy routines, and I was sitting down kind of like sweating and looking at all of this. I wonder, oh my God, you know, how would I fit into that? Thinking, you know, giving me the worst possible example of coming in at the tail end of something where everybody knows each other, and you think, I just sort of like let that go. The next day I went into the interview, and again I had one of those moments where inside I had to tell myself, do not lie. Because the stuff came up about what is it like for you to work with adults in their spiritual development. I mean, I didn't have a lot of experience of that. I'd been working on a campus. I'd been doing some campus ministry, and then it dawned on me, I had been teaching writing for the past 5 years at USF, and then 4 years before that in graduate school, where that was what you did to earn your keep. And I said, well, I think it's a lot like teaching writing. You're there with somebody endeavoring to help them speak and to clarify what they want to say. And mainly I found in teaching writing that my role is to be a listener to their truth. That really was good. It not only gave them a sense that I was amenable to this job and had some relevant experience, it gave me a sense of what it was like, not only to speak my truth, but to begin to enjoy my competence. That had not been part of being interviewed to be an assistant professor in English. That was more jockeying for, like, what do you know, what do I know, you know, what have you read, what have I read, what have you written, what have I read, all of that. I mean, it was very competitive, and the whole spirit of teaching in a, you know, what are those, where you're an assistant faculty member, an assistant professor, it's very competitive, and it was unpleasant for me. So it was really genial to find a group of people with whom I could have a conversation about what did seem more and more to me professionally alive. Later on, I was offered the job even while I was there, and I could not say yes because, you know, I needed to check this all out with two people, the provincial superior of the society, who was Father Leo Klein at the time, who knew this was going on, but I needed to tell him what I felt, and then I needed to figure out how to separate from USF. So it was this way, you know, I really want to go, and I think this is going to work. And that evening, we all went out to a movie. It was The Empire Strikes Back. Where I met Yoda. And I met him talking to Luke Skywalker as an unfinished young man in the midst of an terribly hot humid climate, endeavoring to bring to life his own latent powers, not sure whether to trust them or not, knowing that there was, and it was never examined in the film, this dark corridor of the shadow that he needed to face. And Luke was left kind of unsure whether he was going to be effective with his friends or not, until the very end, after he's met his father, and there, you might remember, healing his arm with a new electric arm as they're flying through the galaxy, and he joins them emphatically to kind of like become one of the heroic moves of the third film, which will bring the set the empire again in disarray. Internally, I felt in exactly these words: the galaxy needs me. In exactly those words. I was there, kind of in what you find on this side of the Discernment page. I was with some of my key images, some of the ways that excite my imagination. I was entering into what I really know of myself and what I really want. So I made the phone calls that were necessary, and, you know, in short order, took that job. And then, God's grace is wonderful, I then had September, October, November, and part of December to conclude my life in San Francisco. Not in a hurried and frantic way. I eliminated a few of the courses I was going to teach. I kept the seminar, and I did the rituals that you do to separate from people that you've come to know and love. And I had several months to do that. My last night in San Francisco, I was on my way to a party up in Marin County, which involves crossing the Golden Gate Bridge. It was a lovely, clear night, and at the other side of the bridge, there's an immediate turnoff if you have the time, and I took the time. I turned off and went up into what is called Land's End and parked the car, walked down a little ways, and sat in the grass overlooking the bay and the bridge and the ocean. And up above the eastern hills was the moon, and going down over the Pacific was the sun. It could not have been more compellingly beautiful. And I mean, I began to cry, and I just said goodbye. So these are things which help me understand I was choosing well. You know, these kinds of simple things where you're moved and where your life seems in motion. And you've got something there, and you can choose it. That choice was, in my personal life, a move from career to calling. And it was I guess I would have to say that I've had about 3 important choices that I've made according to the laws of St. Ignatius, and this last one was close to it, but the first one was the graduate school I chose, and then this move from California to Milford, and then a lot easier transition from Milford to Bellarmine, which was occasioned by a similar situation where I was asked to consider because you lost your pastor, which was what happened at Milford. So I've learned to wait. If I feel something's not working right, just wait. Maybe there is an invitation to come, but it doesn't have to be next week. It can be as simple as what I spoke about there in moving toward doing some work with conference retreats. So where are we here? I think it'd be good if you could chat with 1 or 2 people nearby you and just say something of, do you recognize in your own experience times where you knew something was going on and you wanted to try to appreciate better what was happening within you so that it could have a life-giving effect rather than just thwart you for the next month? You understand? I mean, just talk a little bit about yourselves, and then, after whatever that might be, 5-10 minutes or so, let's see where we are, okay? Any of you in your exchange find material that has helped you to remember and to name what moves in you, what kind of spirits you frequently enough deal with? What is the area, you might say, of self-knowledge, or perhaps where you have found significant choices to make as a result of knowing the spirits that move you? Just a word or two to see, or a question.
Richard, the one thing I just heard in our group was that the response to that movement of the spirit doesn't always feel good because and I'm interpreting it, I'm paraphrasing, because we're called to operate out of our comfort zone.
Yes, you're right.
And that was what we discussed. That just kind of stood out in our conversation, and that it's important to keep working through that and keep understanding and praying about that, because sometimes that pull, that tug can be hard because we're pulling back. No, I don't do that. But
exactly.
That's what we're probably doing.
Yeah, and the comfort zone is, consolation in the spiritual exercises is described as an increase in faith, trust, and love. Those are not comfortable.
Not like happy.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, it is an invitation to step, oh my, this is what it would be to live by faith.
The thing that is striking me with what you've mentioned is sort of the tension between taking a step that is potentially liberating. And I like the example that Donna gave and that you gave, sort of these things that, it would feel very liberating to not go to the meetings anymore. And sometimes we need to do that. It seems like your experience with going to Milford must have felt liberating in some way. And yet, there's sort of that balance with sort of the commitment, which maybe at times might feel oppressive, and yet we sort of need to adjust our eyes or our thinking in a way to realize that, well, no, I'm just not seeing this properly or understanding it properly, and I need to sort of, kind of go along with this, or...
Before you do anything radical, you mean?
Well, just in general, like, well, no, I need to keep going to the meetings, I need to do the men's retreats, because it's not the men's retreat or whatever, it's me having a misconception or misunderstanding or something about what the meetings are about or something like that.
I agree. I think you're pointing to the place too, which is sort of like overlooked in my stories, where you consult with people and get a broader dimension of maybe places where your blind spots or haste could get in the way of what's good. Yeah, some consultation was constant in decisions of this kind, even the one about going to meetings.
One thing I've noticed in my own experience with major transitions or major events is that usually they occur, the opportunities present themselves when I'm at a place where I am comfortable with where I am and who I am, and I feel like and then an opportunity presents and I don't usually expect it. You know, I can spend years looking for a part-time job and think I'm a stay-at-home mom, but this whole time I'm trying to leave the house. And when I finally get comfortable being home with my kids, somebody offers me a job that's just perfect. And I can take it freely because I know I'm not trying to escape anything. It's like a genuine offer.
Yeah, you're working from self-knowledge.
Right,
too.
right.
Yeah. So the benefit of having in your life some place of regular spiritual guidance, because you become more acquainted with typically, how grace is available to you and what your self-deception looks like when it comes. Well, good. It's nearly 11, and I believe this is enough time for whatever is next in your lives. But thank you all.
Thank you.
We'll start here next week and see if we can have some more extended exchange on some matters that are with you.
Thanks so much.
Nice hearing.